Welcome, bienvenue, nous comptons les autres. I'm happy that you have decided to join us today because I know that for each of us, this time of the year can be very hectic. Time nowadays is an ever-evolving notion, often more distorted than one would have hoped. This conference was supposed to happen in October 2020, but the pandemic started in March of that year, and well, you know what happens. At the time, I was unaware that postponing this conference would mean that it would take place during Houston Climate Week, November 15-19, and the aftermath of 40 world leaders gathering in Glasgow at the COP26 summit to supposedly grapple with issues around climate change. This conference thus is timelier than before. We want to join ongoing conversations about the environment, climate change, and related disasters, among other things. We want our approach to be as holistic and inclusive as possible. The point is not to offer answers, but to raise more questions and to broaden ongoing debates. During 2 days, scholars from various fields, institutions and countries, artists and activists from different walks of life will present their deep concerns for the environment and their views on disasters and ecological issues. I would like to thank our sponsors. So this event is sponsored by Rice University's Department of Modern and Classical Literature and Cultures, the Center for African and African American Studies, the Center for Environmental Studies, the School of Humanities, the Humanities Research Center, Creative Ventures, the Mellon Foundation sponsored Diluvial Houston grant, and last but not least, Loyola University, New Orleans. So it's really a collaborative event. I'm also blessed to be supported by colleagues that we see soon as Duno-Gottberg, Professor of Caribbean and Media Study, and Joe Campana, Professor of English and Director of the Center for Environmental Studies. They are great co-organizers and co-conspirators. They decided to follow me in this crazy project and help me bring it to fruition. Cora James used to be one of the member of our team. He's a professor of Latin American Studies from University of Houston, but now he moved to Toronto. I'm also grateful for the support of Dean Kathleen Canning. She's always there when I've got ideas. Last but not least, I'm thankful to Leticia Gonzalez for the help with the logistics. I would also like to thank Christina Medina and Amber Murphy for their support. If you ask me why I thought it would be great to organize this conference, I might say because I could, but really it is because I must. I come from a place of disasters. I come from a place where volcanoes may rock the land, darkening the skies and quickening hearts, where earthquake can turn your life upside down. Hurricane, heavy rains, mudslides, you name it, we in the Caribbean have it. Coming to Houston, as far as disasters were concerned, though, was somewhat familiar. Climate change due to human action and disasters it creates have an impact on all of us. This conference reminds us that we are all connected and ecological disasters impact us all. I cannot continue without acknowledging loss. The people and animals we lost in many infamous hurricanes, Katrina, Harvey, Maria, Irma, among others. I need to recognize the individuals displaced due to these hurricanes, those who lost everything but their lives, who then had to reinvent their lives in new places. Displaced people also include Haitian migrants who crossed recently the seas and then Latin America to ask for asylum at the US border. And we all know now how this ended. Let's not forget also the souls who drowned in New York City due to Irma. Last but not least, let us remember the lost lives due to the pandemic, the loss of jobs, hope, direction, and so on. The discussions during these 2 days will be a homage, a way to grapple with loss and maybe hope. The pandemic has dictated the organization and format of this conference. This event is hybrid in many ways. It is taking place both in person and via Zoom online because I take seriously the idea of the dissemination of knowledge. The discussion you will listen to now or later when the videos will be online are meant as food for thought for the broader community, for all. What do we do when we grapple with loss? Each participant in their own ways will tackle this question. However, as member of the audience, you will also wrestle with that very question as global citizens. Thus, we are looking forward to your questions and comments. We have prepared a vibrant program for you. Now, my colleague Louise will say a few words before passing the baton, so to speak, to Dean Kathleen Canning to close the morning remarks. Then Jean Blackburn will deliver the first keynotes. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. It is so good to have people here present, really present in time and space. We need this. But it's also good to have those of you who are joining us through Zoom. This kind of hybrid event wasn't a thing just a couple of years ago. We're here to engage an urgent conversation on the imminent destruction of our home. I want to share just 2 ideas with you. The first, on our ability to properly see where we are at the juncture, the path of disaster. And the second idea is on the possibility of imagining a new geography drawn by the path of disasters. Both points I will address by imagining all of us navigating the circumstances of our time, the Anthropocene, along Walter Benjamin's Angel of History. And yes, you will say that I'm stretching the reading, but just bear with me listening to this quote and tell me that this is not us in the path of disasters. Benjamin, in his famous quote, said, a clay painting named Angelus Novus shows an angel looking as though he's about to move away from something he's fixedly contemplating. His eyes are starting, his mouth is open, his wings are spread. This is how one pictures the angel of history. His face is turned towards the past, where we perceive a chain of events. He sees one single catastrophe, which keeps piling wreckage upon wreckage. The angel would like to stay, awakening the dead, and make whole that which has been smashed. But a storm is blowing from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skywards. The storm is what we call progress. We move forward contemplating this catastrophe that actually lies behind us. But this wreckage is nothing compared to what awaits ahead. That's how I imagine us addressing this circumstance. Now, assessing and confronting such crisis requires conversations across disciplines, which is what we are about to do. In fact, I believe that disciplinary boundaries and isolation only adds to this idea of the angels of history inability to fully see, to comprehend, to render visible our natural catastrophe. We need the kind of conversation we're about to engage in the next couple of days. It is also possible that this multifocal approach will also reveal connections between spaces seldom studied together. The larger Gulf, the larger US South, Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, are not only share the legacies of plantation, but also share the legacies of path of disasters. So I want to welcome everyone, and I look forward to 2 days of engaging conversations. Thank you, everybody.
It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to Rice this morning and to Houston. I realize a number of you are actually tuning in from Houston and joining us from our fellow institutions and NGOs and so on from the city of Houston, so that's wonderful. I just want to say, as Dean, I've watched this conference take shape over, I think, the first conversation we had. Jacqueline is an amazing person. Most of you know her already, but she comes into my office bubbling with wonderful ideas, and then they actually, they come to fruition. They produce something, and it's an incredible pleasure to see this happening. The collaboration between Luis and Jacqueline was also one of the most exciting aspects of this project, and I really, you guys really did it. And then, of course, conferences take layers of labor and vision, and I would have to say our rapid growth of our new Center for Environmental Studies under the leadership of Joe Campana has been a major force on our campus and in our school for nurturing precisely these projects. So I think this is exactly the promise of both Jacqueline's original vision when you stepped foot on this campus and Joe's enormous support. And the collaboration has been wonderful. So let me just say a little bit about the conference. The conference offers an exciting and exemplary answer to the question where the humanities are going. At Rice, we've been pursuing what I call connected humanities, and one of the crucial questions that term involves is where the humanities actually live and where they best thrive and where they incite and transform, and rather than merely sustaining or rewinding the well-worn and that which we consider the core of our disciplines. We are sometimes too often preoccupied by the recurrent crises of the humanities. Our disciplines are in crisis, our majors, our minors, the funding, hiring, PhD job market. And Robert Newman, director of the National Humanities Center, recently wrote a very short and pithy piece in Inside Higher Ed and called upon us to focus instead on mobilizing our humanities knowledge, not to focus on our own crises, but to focus on the crisis of humanity. And this conference absolutely fulfills this call. And it does so by entwining and melding the interdisciplinary inquiries that are flourishing at Rice in environmental humanities, medical humanities, geographic landscapes of race, migration, and gender, all inscribed with vast differences in access to social, economic, and cultural goods. So the conference offers a wonderful example of our commitment to collaborations across centers, disciplines, departments, and that we see right here. And it involves collaborations with humanities scholars well beyond Rice. We welcome our colleagues from Loyola University, New Orleans, and we welcome our colleagues from University of Houston and several institutions in France, England, and Guadeloupe. And we're delighted that this hybrid format makes it possible for scholars from many more corners of North America and the globe to join us beyond Rice today. And I'd say this, if there's anything at all that we can say we learned during COVID that's positive, it might be that we actually can do this kind of intellectual work together across many geographic spaces. So global issues that this conference tackles via environmental humanities is incredibly crucial. It rethinks knowledge production and the designations of intellectuals and activists. And I'm really grateful that you've also included some of our local activists. So I'm considering the work of the conference also in the context of Houston's Climate Week, November 15th to the 19th. So the conference is also part of a broader discussion in Houston. Houston is, of course, a location of rich environmental and climate disasters. For those of you who don't know it, I believe our colleagues in New Orleans can relate even more. So some of those include hurricanes, chemical spills and accidents, industry-induced cancer clusters across certain neighborhoods, And then, of course, the failure of the grid during the February freeze this year, leaving almost the entire city without power and water and causing the deaths of hundreds. So this conference is taking place at a critical moment for the environment and at a critical moment for democracy. And that's where I think Luis's citation of Benjamin's Angel of History is actually rather apt. I'm a German historian, to be fully frank, and I can tell you how many times we've put that image up on the screen and made a similar argument about sort of when Benjamin was deciding to go across the border to the Pyrenees. So it's a critical moment for the environment and a critical moment for democracy, with a heightened need for us to contemplate the relationship between sustaining democracy and mobilizing against climate disaster. It's also taking place at a critical moment for the humanities. In that spirit, we welcome you to Rice and to Houston. We look forward to your engagement, your debates, and your creative interventions over the next 2 days.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joseph Campana. I'm a professor of English. I direct the Center for Environmental Studies, which is located in the Schools of Humanities and Architecture. And I do so with the incredible support of two deans, one of whom you've just heard from, Kathleen Canning, but also Bill Marjanovic, who is in the back with us today. We're really grateful for that support, and we're excited about collaborations. One of the things that I love most about the job that I do is that I get to have all sorts of collaborations I never really imagined I would be having when I was training as a graduate student, but also in my first years here as an assistant professor. And I'm very much looking forward to what's happening between humanities and architecture in the months and in the semesters to come. I want to congratulate Luis and Jacqueline on a fantastic conference to come. They were so kind to call me a co-organizer. I've just been supporting where I can. This is sort of their vision. And I want to say about that, they came to me and said, well, what do you think about this? We're working on a conference and there are scientists and there are scholars and there are artists, and we'd like to get some environmental advocates. And I just thought, you just sort of read my job description for what I'm supposed to be doing. So thank you. Thanks to both of them for organizing this incredible occasion. And as I think about disasters, just before I introduce our very sort of special plenarist today, Jim Blackburn, I've lived here in Houston for about 15 years, and every autumn, when I'm usually thinking about the autumn weather of the Northeast where I grew up, I'm thinking about the lines at the beginning of a very famous elegy from my home period. I'm a poet and I'm a literary scholar by John Milton, who is not geographically appropriate, but who wrote an elegy very famous called Lycidas, which began with the devastating phrase, "Yet once more." Yet once more is how we feel every autumn in the Gulf Coast and in this region as we wonder what the storm season is going to be like. And I think for me, the only thing that makes those seasons bearable is being in community and in conversation with others. And I think many of us feel that way right now after a discouraging COP26 and a very hard moment. So I'm incredibly grateful for the community I have here at Rice, and for those who are joining us today to build an even bigger community. So thank you all for being here. Just one last thing I want to say before I introduce Jim Blackburn. Here we're in Houston in the Gulf Coast, but we're on the ancestral lands of the Karankawa, the Sana, the Coehuilton, the Atacama Ishak. And I just want to acknowledge that before I turn to our plenary. Jim Blackburn. You can say many things about Jim Blackburn. I want to start by saying that he is, amongst his many, many other accomplishments, he is a humanist and a poet. I'd like you to remember that, because he is also an environmental lawyer and planner, professor of practice in the environmental law in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, where he teaches environmental law and sustainable design. He's co-director of the SPEED Center, Severe Storm Prevention, Education, and Evacuation from Disaster, about which I think you'll be hearing this morning. And he's a faculty scholar at the Baker Institute, director of the undergraduate minor in energy and water sustainability, and an excellent teacher, about which I'll say something in a moment. Professor Blackburn set aside active environmental litigation to concentrate on research and teaching, and to expand his planning practice through his firm Sustainable Planning and Design. He's authored 2 books. Actually, is this the third?
Third one, yes.
Third one, okay, let's update that. He's authored 3 books, one of which he's got here and it's just come out. But the other two are called the Book of Texas Bays and the Texas Plan for the Texas Coast. And this one is called Earth Church. Earth Church, which is available. He has received the Distinguished Alumni Laureate Award from New York University, the Good Egg Award from the International Crane Foundation for litigation to protect the endangered whooping crane in 2015, and the Barbara C. Jordan Community Advocate Award from Texas Southern University, as well as the Robert Eckert Lifetime Coastal Achievement Award from the General Land Office of the State of Texas. Many, many other things that I could read from Professor Blackburn's enviable CV, but I just want to say three final things before the main event, which is his incredible talk to come. Professor Blackburn has been a sort of incredible pillar for environmental studies education at Rice University. He teaches in the environmental studies curriculum, which I co-direct, incredibly popular classes in environmental law and environmental policy. And so this is where I'm going to say, of course, I would most like to take at Rice right now is Jim Blackbird's environmental law class. So if you see someone in the back with like a mustache and a kind of hat on, that's me, don't throw me out. The second thing I want to say, there have been a number of conversations lately at Rice, and I hope they will intensify and continue about a broader environmental institute that helps work as a hub for the many different environmental advocates and organizations on campus. We'll see how that goes. Such things are normally named after a major donor of some variety, but I'd like to say here and now, my vote is that this become the Jim Blackburn Environmental Institute at Rice University. But since no one listens to me, I apologize, Jim. I don't know if that's going to happen. The last thing that I just want to say is environmental futures depend on paying attention to large, difficult global and planetary scale problems, but the solutions are built from the ground up. In local places. That's why occasions like this are so important. And I just want to say finally, I have the feeling myself from my experiences of him, from his decades of knowledge and advocacy here in this area, that every locale needs a Jim Blackburn. So we get to enjoy him here today. Please welcome Professor Jim Blackburn.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning and talk with you. I don't know if I can follow up Joseph's introduction, but I'll give it my best. I want to talk today about the future of the Texas Gulf Coast in the theme of the conference. We're certainly living in the path of disaster, and that's kind of what I'd like to talk about. And I'll throw in a few other things here and there. I'd like to start off by just saying, you know, the Earth is this wonderful host that we have that all of us in the world have in common, and we just don't get it. The Earth is literally probably the most misunderstood kind of organism that we have. I think that it's the perfectly evolved tool that frankly we don't fully understand, and we certainly don't respect it. Okay? And you know, we have always thought of ourselves as being able to control nature, and I think the control of the nature is probably the biggest fallacy that we have. I think we're experiencing the failure to control nature and the consequences of it. And I think in the future, we will see our economy and ecology come together in what will be known as the circular economy of the future. And so a lot of those things I want to talk about, but before I do all of that, I want to go through what we live with. I started studying hurricanes seriously. I as an environmental litigator, have litigated flooding for a long time in the Houston region. But in 2008, I basically missed Houston. It caused $20 billion in damage. It destroyed the Bolivar Peninsula, flooded Galveston horribly, but basically missed us because the storm came up Galveston Bay, as you can see with that black line coming up through the bay on the far side of the diagram. It flooded a tremendous amount of real estate. It was only, quote unquote, a Category 2 storm, and it had a surge very much like a Category 4 storm. If it had hit where it was proposed to hit, projected to hit, down the coast, we would have likely killed 2,000 to 4,000 people in the low-lying areas because people on the Texas coast don't evacuate for a Category 1 or 2 storm. We need a 3 or a 4 or 5 before we really get moving. With rapid intensification, that's going to be a horrible thought. But at any rate, in 2008 at Rice, at the Severe Storm Center, we got a major grant to study. Sorry, to study hurricanes. And hurricanes are nothing new on the Texas coast. This is a map of hurricanes that goes back to 1900. We've had very few Category 4 storms, very few Category 3 storms. Most of this is green and yellow, Categories 1s and 2s. And it's not as much up to date. Harvey was a 4 that's not on here. But I think the point is, looking into the past is the worst possible thing we can do to determine the future with climate change. And yet that is what all of our engineering methodologies are about. It's the way we think about these things. I think there's going to be more engineering malpractice in the future than we can imagine, because you can't look to the past to predict the future when the climate is changing. Yet that's what we do. Rapid intensification is going to kill a lot of people on the Texas coast, I'm afraid. And we will see more Category 3s, 4s, and 5 if you can believe the literature, which I do believe, about climate change. We will see bigger, badder storms in the future than we have in the past. Now, you guys from Louisiana can bear testament to this. Louisiana had essentially five body blows, and these storms are body blows. They are literally come in and whack an area. I mean, I've been studying Cameron Parish for quite some time. Cameron will never be the same. Lake Charles will never be the same. Hackberry will never be the same. If these storms had hit the Texas coast, we might not even be standing here, but we certainly wouldn't have the habitation we've got down on the coast, and we would have probably experienced the worst environmental disaster in United States history. So over at Speech Center, I was very fortunate to get involved with some excellent researchers. I can claim none of these credits, but I get to hang around with a bunch of really smart people, which really is great. And I've computer modeling over at Dr. Bedian at Rice, Clint Dawson of the University of Texas, and using supercomputer, we can simulate hurricanes coming across the Atlantic, coming into the Gulf. We can make them hit wherever we want to. The worst case place for a storm coming into Houston is where that black line comes across on the, I guess as you're looking at it, be the left-hand side of the screen. That's about 30 miles south of Galveston, down near San Luis Pass at the end of West Galveston Island. And I want to take you through a big Category 3, small Category 4 coming into Houston. This is 24 hours before landfall, and watch the color code on the right. That tells you how high the water is going to rise in feet. What we see to begin with is the marsh is flooded. 12 hours ahead of time, Galveston Island is penetrated just below the seawall, which is the black line. Let's see if I've got it. I can fool around with this. That's the seawall in Galveston right there where I've got the arrow. Keep your eye on that seawall. It's 17 feet high. We've now got, about 10-foot surge, 12 hours ahead of time. You can't get off the island. You can't get off the Bolivar Peninsula. If you haven't left by now, you're in deep trouble. 6 hours prior to landfall, the surge is up to about 14 feet at the seawall. It's right at the top, beginning to break over it, and we're beginning to see flooding moving inland. 3 hours before landfall, we're up to about 17 feet. The seawall is beginning to be overtopped. Everything in Galveston's flooded, and we're beginning to see flooding spread up into the western shoreline of Galveston Bay. Texas City, which is right here where my arrow is, has a levee around it. That levee is also 17 feet, and it will be overtopped as well. 2 hours prior to landfall, we're upwards of 17, 18 feet at the coast. Serious flooding beginning to occur inland. 1 hour before landfall, we're up to about 18 feet all over the west shoreline. Most of that shoreline, some of it's 5 feet in elevation. Very little of it is greater than 10 feet in elevation, except where we have a few bluffs and scarps. And then there's landfall. It's 20 feet at Galveston, 3 feet over the seawall. It's now beginning to flood the west shoreline of Galveston Bay, where 800,000 people live extensively. 1 hour after landfall, it's getting worse coming up the bay. The storm magnifies coming up into the bay system. We're beginning to see flooding inside the Texas City levee. 2 hours after landfall, and we're up to 22 feet in the upper part of the bay going up into the Houston Ship Channel. Houston Ship Channel has about 7 refineries. Around the bay, there's about 7 refineries. I think 5 are around it, are in the Ship Channel. 2 are down in Texas City. There's probably 400 chemical plants that we're talking about. It's the biggest industrial concentration in the United States and among the biggest in the world. 3 hours after landfall, we're 23 feet up into the Ship Channel. The west side of Galveston Bay is flooded. Flooding goes all the way inlet to about NASA. Texas City is flooded as well behind the levee. 4 hours after landfall, it's just gotten worse. 5 hours, it's even worse. This is kind of the summary map that kind of shows most of the developed western shoreline of Galveston Bay is flooded. I would say easily 200,000 homes would be impacted by floodwaters. It'll be the worst environmental disaster in United States history. It's estimated by Jamie Paget over at Civil Engineering to be about 100 million gallons of oil and hazardous substances because there's 2,200 storage tanks that will be flooded. Those tanks store oil and hazardous substances. Those will come inland to the east side of Houston, and then they'll go back into Galveston Bay where most of it will not get out into the Gulf. Deepwater Horizon was 210 million gallons. This is about 100 million gallons. And Exxon Valdez was about 12 million, 11 million for comparison. That's our future if we don't do something to abate it. Now, after Ike, this is my favorite slide of the whole presentation. That slide is of a marker that was put up with FEMA money after Hurricane Ike came through. And it says it's a big intersection down in that western shoreline of Galveston Bay, not far from NASA, right in the heart of the area most heavily impacted. And it says, if there'd been a category 4, it'd go this high. Category 5, it's way up here. You know how long that marker stayed in place? 2 months. Now, why did we remove it? Well, it screwed up real estate sales. Now, think about that. We're more concerned about selling real estate than we are about telling the truth about flood risk. That's the reality we live with. That's the problem. We have trouble being honest about these issues. Honesty is lacking across the board. It's been a problem with climate from the beginning. It continues to be a problem. We lost basically 2 decades at least of defensive thinking of, if you will, thinking about how we're going to respond to the challenge of climate because we couldn't talk about it. The most amazing thing that happened, Bobby Tudor, who was an official here at Rice on the board of trustees, actually made a wonderful presentation in January of 2020 at the Houston Partnership where he started talking about climate change publicly. It was about the first time that it had been publicly discussed in Houston by the business community. Politicians still have trouble talking about climate change. I'm not sure Governor Abbott has accepted it yet. I argued before the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality and was prohibited from bringing evidence of climate change into legal proceedings. Honesty. We have to tell the truth about what's happening. Because these storms, as bad as what I showed you is, that's a big category 3, small 4. We're going to be seeing more 4s and 5s. We've got to tell the truth about this. Tropical Storm Allison came along in 2001, flooded everything from the middle of Houston east. Out west, they didn't do as bad. But this is the cover of the report about Allison. Flood Control District says off the charts. It's aberrant. It's way up here. All of our other storms are down here. Here's Allison up here, off the charts. On one level, it's kind of like, don't worry about it. It was a big storm. So how about a little statistics? This is an environmental lawyer presenting statistics. Bell curve, averages. You know, we kind of work off of statistics. Statistics are an important part of education, academics. Engineers rely on statistics tremendously. So the average is kind of right there where that bell gets real big. 100-year storm. How many of you have heard that term, 100-year storm? Okay. Well, that's over here between 2% and 0.1%. There's your 100-year storm, your 1% event. It's supposed to be out on the edge. Yeah, it's a relatively rare event. There's Allison. It was about a 10,000-year event when it occurred. There's Harvey, tax day, cold front, 100-year storm. Harvey, that was a 10,000 to 40,000 year storm. A Mellon, another 10,000 year storm. That's what climate change looks like. Aggregation at the edge of the bell curve. Things that are supposed to be skewed across the bell curve are now concentrated at the edge. TBD. I saw a stockbroker making a presentation about the bell curve, and he drew a line at the edge of the bell curve, about where that 100-year line was, and said TBD on this side of it, beyond that, and TBD on the beyond on the other side. And you go, TBD, what is TBD? It's not to be determined. It says there be dragons. There are dragons at the edge of the bell curve. We're living with dragons. That's climate change. 100-year floodplain map. That is the most dangerous map that is out there right now because it is obsolete and gives false information. This 100-year map, 100-year flood map, is being redone currently by Harris County. Now, this is a chart, it's a little dense, but if you focus on the 24-hour duration and you look at the 100-year number in yellow, you see 13 inches. That's what that old map I showed you, this map back here. That map is 13 inches in 24 hours, 100-year floodplain. NOAA did a restudy after Harvey at the end of 2017, and they came up with the numbers in green. So we went from 13 to about 17 inches. And that's our new 100-year, and we're mapping that floodplain right now. But look at the numbers. Imelda, 21 inches. Harvey, 25, 26 inches. Tax day, 17.5. Allison, 25. October of 94, another cold front, 21 inches. We've got 5 storms that are larger than that 100-year already. It's obsolete before it comes out. Now, this is a HEC-RAS model of flooding from Harvey. And the flooding from Harvey was massive. You know, you're not going to handle that much water. You've got to make room for water. We've got to get honest. We cannot protect everybody. In the Netherlands, they're making room for the river. That whole area you see on this right-hand side, this whole area, that used to be people. They have moved everybody out and have now enlarged the river. We've got to give water more room. And we've got to quit planning looking in our rearview mirror. The statistics of the past are not all that relevant. And yet every engineering methodology I know relies on engineering or it relies on statistics from the past. Quickly, the Corps of Engineers has planned a major coastal spine. This is all sand dunes to be built, big gauge structure, backside levee around Galveston, dune structure coming in down here, a couple of gates up in the here. This is non-structural here. The Corps of Engineers can only plan for basically a Category 2 storm or small because of their benefit cost methodologies. They do not take climate change into account. If we were to get a Category 5 after spending $26 billion for that project, the flooding would be massive. There would be $100 billion in disasters that would occur. At Severe Storm Center, we have designed this put into the bay as a second level of defense. We had to go beyond what the Corps could be authorized to do because climate change is not integral to their methodology. Every coastal city in the United States that has a hurricane risk, Atlantic, Gulf for sure, are going to have to go through the same process. You're going to have private augmentation of government to survive climate change. Finally, I want to just talk a little bit about economics meeting ecology. We noticed that the low-lying areas along the coast did well. Nature is adapted to getting flooded. How do we preserve these natural areas, keep them from being developed, if you will? In Texas, we're not going to regulate them. I can tell you that right now. That's not happening. But maybe we can figure out how to send money from Houston that has a bunch into these low-lying areas to protect them. And over at the Baker Institute, I'm kind of a co-leader of a group. We formed a group of stakeholders, started off with 40, we're over 250 now. And we're forming a private carbon market so that those that are emitting carbon dioxide can pay landowners to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and store it. The Texas carbon market was actually one of 6 net zero finalists in the Climate Challenge Cup in Glasgow. We were also included on another team from the United Kingdom. We are having quite a lot of interest and success in starting this. We have a new nonprofit called B Carbon that we have started up, and it is now basically issuing credits. The first 34,000 tons of carbon credits will be issued probably next month. And we have 200,000 tons in the wings. We have interest from Australia, United Kingdom, Germany, Estonia, India, as well as all over the United States. It's the most fascinating thing I've ever been involved in. So perhaps we can put together, the light green is National Wildlife Refuges, and we have a lot of, ecology is our best kept secret in Houston. We have wonderful coastal ecology. The dark green, we're going to preserve those lands with carbon credits. And, you know, if you put in those 2 coastal spines I was telling you about, the coastal spine, the Galveston Bay Park Plan, we might actually have a decent future in the Houston region, but it'll take us 20 years to get these structures built. I've got a feeling we're going to see one of those Carlas, Ikes, big one from 1900. We'll be seeing those. And my final thought is, I think that we have to have a spiritual side to being able to adapt to what is coming. I don't think we're mentally ready for it, and I think it's going to take a spiritual connection. I've just written a new book called Earth Church, and it's a combination of kind of spiritual writing and 96 poems and paintings that are paired. And if I can take just a minute more, I would like to end with a poem from the book. Of course, I've got to find. Called The Laughing Gulf. The bay is flat, the tide is slack. The laughing gulls are loafing, laying back. The wind's a light pressure in my face. I feel the day's tension begin to erase. No sound comes from the laughing gulls, sitting on the pilings, extending like hulls. All that remains of the piers that once claimed Galveston Bay was a human domain. Today, there's no sense, there's really no clue of what these big storms can do to you. the battering, smashing force of attack that smashes down your bayfront shack. Storms that today we name in fear, storms with messages for the human ear. Carla Ike and the big one in Galveston all have the power to make locals run. Science says these storms are getting more severe, and that is the truth that we need to hear. About our climate changing and to what extent, and the truth about this, well, have you heard of him? Truth, we need to hear it. Truth, it sometimes hurts. Truth, it clears illusion. Truth, it reveals the dirt. Truth, politicians hate it. Truth, many people do too. Truth, it keeps me balanced. Truth, it's good for you too. The laughing gull spreads its wings and flies and promises truth and to tell me no lies. I love this earth that speaks truth to me and helps me to live life honestly. So welcome to Earth Church. Pull yourself up a pew. Hear the laughing gulls call out the truth to you. Thank you.
Do we have any question? At least one question? Stop share. And we can see you. Yes.
I'd love it if you would go back before you get rid of the PowerPoint and show us that map that showed the water flow, and it was the overview, and tell us more about that map and how if you created it or if Noah created it or whomever. I think it tells us from more.
That one?
Yes. Yes,
that
that's
one.
a story that is so interesting from a different
This
perspective.
is a fascinating map, and I apologize for having to go through these slides a little faster than I had hoped, but this is a HEC-RAS model prepared by Speed Center, Severe Storm Center at Rice. Dr. Bedian, and actually it's one of Dr. Bedian's master students that prepared this. To kind of give you context, this is Greens and Halls Bayou, north of Loop 610. This is what's called the Harding Toll Road. This is Interstate 45 north, and this is 59 north here. And then this is Beltway 8 up by the Houston. The airport is just right up here. This is a low income, primarily minority neighborhood area of Houston. And this is what happened during Harvey. This is a, if you will, simulation of the flooding. And I think the point here is, one, this water is going to go where it's going to go. There was probably 25,000 homes flooded in this area. That water is flowing down toward the bayous, but you can see where the roads are obstructing it. You can see where basically the system is overwhelmed. Most people have not seen a slide like this about Harvey. Everybody knows there was a lot of flooding. Dr. Bedian thinks Harvey is now a 35 to 70 year storm. So this is what the 100-year storm looks like. Maybe more recent. Kerry Emanuel at MIT thinks by 2100, Harvey will be a 5-year storm. So these are images we need to be thinking about. We are going to have to remove a lot of houses from this water. People hate to be bought out. People hate to be removed. We don't have replacement housing for low income areas. Just period, does not exist. But this is reality. And this is why, the worst thing that politicians hate is telling somebody we can't protect you. But that's the truth of the matter. And I think the sooner we understand it and start dealing with it straight up, the better we're going to be. It might mean that a lot of people don't come to Houston. I think that's a worry. The chambers of commerce in every coastal city are horrified about this. Our economic expectations may have to change. On the other hand, Houston is going to be a wonderful place to live with the natural system that we can hopefully put in place to absorb a lot of this. But it'll be a very different reality than what we've got today. And it's sobering, frightening, challenging, but it's also real. This is not conjecture. That's the image. Other questions?
Other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I really appreciated you pointing out the kind of failure of imagination to think about what could happen and this kind of reliance on this idea of the 100-year storm. Coming into Houston from the American West, we're now experiencing what could become the second decade of a drought, which is inconceivable in the West. And yet one of the problems is that we have this, very limited historical perspective where we look at the last 100 years, which are some of the wettest in the geological record for the American West. And then we know that the region can sustain several 100-year-long mega droughts. So I guess my question is, you've written a book about how do we get people to imagine, to enlarge their perspective instead of always, it always seems like we know these are the problems, like the Hurricane Pam exercise before Katrina, and yet it always seems to get pushed to the side due to limited imagination.
Well, I think there's kind of several aspects there. By the way, I just spent 2 weeks kind of touring the southern Utah, and I got to see Lake Powell personally. And Lake Powell is just incredibly low. I saw the largest boat ramp I've ever seen that stopped 30 feet above the water level. It's incredible implications for agriculture and for development out west with what's happening with the Colorado River system. I think that our biggest failure has been a failure to envision a future with climate change, with the climate changing. It doesn't say, I'm not for stopping trying to address it. Don't get me wrong. I'm for net zero, I'm for all of that. But I think adaptation is going to be an absolute essential. We've already had 1 degree of climate change. We will have 1.5 most likely, and probably 2. What does that mean, and how do we envision that future? We've been scared of it, and fear leads us to not talk about things. And I think that's the exact wrong approach. I think I would love to see more envisioning exercises. I think what would it look like to take this map and turn it into a livable map? What would it look like? Where would you put the water? How much water would you put where? How many houses does that mean to remove? And to have an honest conversation with the neighborhood about that. I'm working with the northeast area of town right now, and this is an area that has gotten short end of the stick with every allocation of funds, with every public works that there is in Houston. And frankly, I don't think the politicians feel like they can trust the public with this information. I think that's our failure to talk honestly and to be able to envision these futures. I think the biggest failure of the environmental community is envisioning what a future looks like at net zero. Right now, I think a lot of people are just horrified about it. I think there's a different economy coming that's going to be great. I think it will be different than anything that we have at the current time.
Thank you so much.